So to the Filipino boxer Manny Pacquiao, whose victory over Oscar De La Hoya we'll hear about shortly.
Sports World with Richard Connolly on the BBC World Service.
For the closing stages shortly here on the BBC World Service. Now though to boxing, and the Filipino fighter Manny Pacquiao provided further evidence of his greatness in Las Vegas on Saturday night. He stepped up 2 weight divisions to demolish Oscar De La Hoya, forcing the 6-weight world champion to remain on his stool at the end of the 8th round. The boxing writer and broadcaster Steve Bunce watched the fight and told me Pacquiao was in sparkling form.
Well, last night, what we saw in Las Vegas was one of the finest performances by an underdog in any fight I think I've ever seen. Sure, Oscar De La Hoya has probably passed his peak. Sure, Oscar De La Hoya, we know, probably struggled to make the welterweight limit. But this guy, Pacquiao, 4 or 5 years ago, 2 stone separated these two. And last night, Pacquiao, the hero, beyond the hero, a cult figure, idolized in the Philippines, fought a perfect fight to slowly but inevitably break down Oscar De La Hoya, the great Oscar De La Hoya, the golden boy, and forcing De La Hoya. It wasn't the referee, trust me, it was De La Hoya. It wasn't the doctor, it was De La Hoya who decided after 8 rounds of his left eye nearly closed and his spirit broken for the first time in his truly remarkable career, he decided to quit. It was stunning. Breathtaking to watch.
Yeah, and there's quite a bit of concern before the fight, or at least some concern, that the disparity in weight that you mentioned there potentially could even have been dangerous to Pacquiao. So it's a remarkable result in that context, isn't it?
Hey, absolutely. Some of the so-called best boxing scribes in America, and I'm no big fan of them, as you know, some of them were suggesting that Freddie Roach, who's Pacquiao's trainer, was very mercenary, and that Bob Arum, who is Pacquiao's promoter, really should be ashamed of himself for putting their fighter at risk. But at the end of the day, even if, and I'm convinced of this, even De La Hoya at his peak at welterweight last night, I'm not saying he would have quit after 8 rounds, but there's no guarantee he would have won. Because this little guy, Manny Pacquiao, because he's not from a necessarily fantastically sexy boxing nation, the Philippines, he is a great modern fighter. In the last 20 years, he's one of the top 10 fighters. He is a great. He really is. We've been saying this as he's moved through the weights: featherweight, super featherweight, lightweight. Most of his big wins in fights, about 20-odd world title fights at those different weights, have been when he's been the underdog. Because for some reason, we don't seem to believe in him. And he gets in the ring and he smashes these fantastic Mexicans to bits. He is a great fighter.
And he was well rewarded for last night's fight, wasn't he? Despite the current financial climate. We had Bert Sugar on Sports World yesterday saying this was evidence, this money available was evidence of a boxing resurgence. Would you go along with that?
Well, what it is, Oscar De La Hoya has a company called Golden Boy. It's been valued by Forbes magazine at $1 billion. Yes, $1 billion. So that puts it in, this is a 2-man company with a dozen fighters who have a couple of loose TV deals, and they generate the type of money that Arsenal and Man U would love to generate. So just think about that in footballing terms. This fight last night managed to sell extraordinary amounts of tickets. It managed to move $17 million worth in 60 minutes. That was just the tickets. They would have generated last night $120 million. Bear in mind that Oscar De La Hoya last year set a record for boxing. I mean, better than anything Mike Tyson did. Better than anything that's ever been done. That was last year against Floyd Mayweather. Last night's fight will be in the top 5 grossing fights in history. So Bert is absolutely right. Not that Bert is ever wrong, he has to understand, but Bert Sugar is absolutely right. It seems to me that boxing at this level, the top level, the Calzaghe level, the Hatton level, the David Haye level, the Oscar De La Hoya, Manny Pacquiao level, it seems that their boxing is Teflon tough and it is completely recession-proof at that level.
So it's the super fights that are the future for boxing. I mean, there was no world title on the line last night. Are you concerned that perhaps world titles are being a little bit undermined by all these?
I'm quite pleased that in many instances world titles are being undermined, because the world titles, there are four main sanctioning bodies. They're created and run by a group of self-electing people. Anybody can set one up, quite literally. One of the most successful ones in the 90s was run from a flower shop in London's Bethnal Green, and it generated millions, trust me. So I'm not bothered. What's happened here is De La Hoya has nothing to prove world title-wise. He's won fights all over the place at different weights. Neither has Pacquiao. They made this fight at a catch weight. Pacquiao came up from lightweight. De La Hoya came down from middleweight, light middleweight, where he had his last fight. This had nothing to do with the tacky, Diamante-encrusted balls that they strap around their waist. This had everything to do with the fans demanding it. 15,101 fans, an absolute sellout at the MGM. Unbelievable business in America on pay-per-view. Fantastic interest online. And I'll tell you what, I don't even want to think what business it did in the Philippines. We are told that when he fights, crime stops. You've heard this story. This is not rubbish. This is a fact. Crime stops for the hour that Pacquiao gets in the ring. The problem is he just can't fight every day for a year.
It's a shame, I'm sure, for the police in that particular country. Just very briefly, Steve, what's next for De La Hoya? Is that it for his fighting career? And for Pacquiao, who's next?
Absolutely. For De La Hoya, he becomes a full-time promoter. It's the part-time promoter, the brilliant part-time promoter he's been for the last 3 years. And Pacquiao, sit down, ye fans in merry old Great Britain, because I believe we could see Pacquiao against Ricky Hatton next year. It will only sell 90,000 tickets at Wembley. It won't be much of an event.
Steve Bunce there, energized by Manny Pacquiao beating Oscar De La Hoya in Las Vegas on Saturday night. Pacquiao, it sounds like the most effective crime-fighting device in the Philippines, as well as being pretty much conclusively now the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world, Manny Pacquiao. Sunday Sports World here on the BBC World Service, off shortly to the Hawthorne.